Billionaire CEO needed a date for his brother's wedding, who he walked in with shocked everyone. "You," Alexander Reed said, his voice cutting through the silence of his empty office. "You will accompany me to my brother's wedding this Saturday." The glass paperweight nearly slipped from Emily Chen's hands. The most powerful CEO in New York was pointing directly at her. Not at the investment banker who'd been pursuing him for months. Not at the senator's daughter who'd sent him expensive gifts. But at her, the night cleaner with worn sneakers and 5 years of secrets in her past. "Mr. Reed, I think you're mistaken," she whispered, her voice trembling. I am never mistaken," he interrupted, stepping closer, his custom-made watch catching the light. "Every woman who wants to be on my arm has an agenda. But you—" His steel-gray eyes studied her face with unsettling intensity. "You look at me like you see the person, not the portfolio everyone covets." "How do I look at you?" she asked, surprised by her own courage. His lips curved into something almost like a smile, but sharper, more calculating. "Like you see the man, not just his billions." Alexander reached out, his fingertips barely brushing her cheek. "And that makes you either very brave or very foolish." What she didn't know was that by agreeing to accompany the most intimidating CEO in America, she wasn't just stepping into his world for one night. She was stepping into a war that would force them both to decide what and who was worth fighting for. If you've ever wondered what happens when the most feared businessman in the city finds the one person who isn't afraid of him, stay with me. This is how their story began. The Reed Tower stood in downtown Manhattan like a monument. 72 floors of glass and steel, the company logo illuminating the night sky. To the outside world, Alexander Reed was a brilliant visionary with interests in technology, clean energy, and medical research. But beneath that polished exterior was something colder. An empire built on ruthless strategy, calculated risks, and unwavering control. Inside those walls, Alexander ruled with precision. His word was final. His decisions, unquestioned. Each day followed a careful routine. Meetings with executives, conference calls, reviewing data until long past midnight. The staff moved around him efficiently, trained to anticipate needs, solve problems, and remain professional at all times. But even the most powerful CEOs need clean offices. The night cleaning staff was Emily Chen's world. For 3 years, she had worked there, moving through the empty offices when most employees had gone home. She organized desks exactly as she found them, dusted equipment carefully, and emptied trash bins without disturbing a single paper. She knew the preferences of each executive, who needed their coffee mugs washed by hand, who kept family photos that required special care, who left confidential documents that shouldn't be seen. That late Thursday night, she was finishing the executive floor. The building had finally quieted after a tense board meeting. She could tell it had been tense from the multiple coffee cups left behind, from the conference room chairs pushed back at odd angles. Something had happened, something important, but it wasn't her place to know what. Emily secured her hair in a tighter ponytail and focused on dusting Alexander Reed's office. Her uniform, navy blue pants and a matching polo shirt with the cleaning company's logo, was slightly wrinkled from 8 hours of work. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, evidence of too many late shifts and early morning classes at the community college. At 30, Emily Chen had mastered the art of invisibility. She kept her head down, her voice soft, her presence forgettable. In the 5 years since she had fled Seattle, she had learned that safety lay in being overlooked. Even now, in the supposed security of night shifts, she maintained the habit of fading into the background. The office door opened silently. She didn't notice at first, not until she felt that distinct change in the air, the weight of someone watching her. Emily looked up and immediately froze. Alexander Reed stood in the doorway, still dressed in the charcoal suit he'd worn all day, though his tie was loosened at his throat. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it in frustration. Everything about him commanded attention. Behind him, James Crawford, Alexander's chief of staff, stood with his usual serious expression, though his eyebrows rose slightly when Alexander stepped into the office. The silence stretched between them. Emily's hands clutched the microfiber cloth as she waited for him to speak. "You," Alexander finally said, pointing directly at her. "You will accompany me to my brother's wedding this Saturday." The words didn't make sense at first. Emily's brain scrambled to rearrange them into something that could possibly be meant for her. "Sir?" she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander's eyes narrowed slightly. He wasn't accustomed to repeating himself. "Nathan's wedding," he said, his tone making it clear this was not a request. "In 2 days. You'll accompany me." James shifted uncomfortably behind him. "Sir, perhaps Miss Harrington would be more appropriate. She's been quite persistent about." Alexander didn't even turn around. "Did I ask for your opinion?" James immediately fell silent, his expression carefully neutral once more. Emily set the paperweight down before her trembling hands could drop it. Her mind raced with confusion. Alexander Reed had his choice of companions. Business partners' daughters, models, actresses, even politicians eager to curry favor. Why would he choose someone like her? "Mr. Reed," she said, somehow finding her voice. "I think you're mistaken. I'm just the night cleaner." Alexander stepped closer, and Emily had to resist the urge to step back. At 6'2", he towered over her, his presence filling the office in a way that made it hard to breathe. "I am not mistaken," he said, the words measured and final. Emily swallowed hard, her throat suddenly dry. "Why me?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Staff didn't question Alexander Reed. They certainly didn't ask him to explain his decisions. But instead of anger, something else flickered across his face. Something almost like interest. He studied her with that same calculating look he gave to business proposals and potential acquisitions. "Every woman who wants to be on my arm has an agenda," he said. "You don't. You don't know that," Emily replied, again surprising herself with her boldness. Alexander's lips curved slightly. "I make it my business to know everything about the people in my building, Emily Chun." The sound of her name in his mouth sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. Did he know about Seattle? About what she had exposed? About why she had run? No, if he knew, she wouldn't still be standing in his office. She didn't want to think about where she'd be. "You don't want money," Alexander continued, circling her slowly. "You've had access to my office for years and haven't taken anything. You don't want status. You actively avoid attention from everyone, including the day staff. You don't want influence. You've turned down 3 promotions to supervisor." Emily stared at him, shocked that he knew these details of her life. She had thought herself invisible, unnoticed. She had been wrong. "So what do I want?" she asked quietly. Alexander stopped in front of her again. "Peace," he said simply. "Anonymity. Safety. All things I understand." Before she could respond, the office door swung open again. Eleanor Reed, Alexander's mother and the family matriarch, entered, then stopped abruptly when she saw them. "Alexander," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "I thought I heard voices. It's very late. I was just informing Ms. Chun that she'll be accompanying me to Nathan's wedding," Alexander replied, not taking his eyes off Emily. Eleanor was silent for a beat too long. "I see," she finally said, her tone suggesting she didn't see at all. "Alexander, may I speak with you privately?" "No need," he answered. "Whatever you have to say can be said here." Eleanor pressed her lips together, clearly displeased. "Very well. I was under the impression that you would be bringing someone more suitable to such an important event. The governor will be there, as well as the Harrington family. They're bringing their daughter, who has expressed quite an interest in." "I've made my choice," Alexander interrupted, his voice carrying that note of finality that Emily had heard him use with his executives. Eleanor's gaze shifted to Emily, taking in her work uniform, her simple appearance, her obvious discomfort. "The cleaning staff?" she said, unable to keep the disbelief from her voice. You're taking the cleaning staff to your brother's wedding? James coughed quietly into his fist, a sound that might have hidden a laugh. Eleanor shot him a withering look. Yes, Alexander said, crossing his arms. I am taking Emily Chun. But she's staff, his mother insisted. And the people attending are. I don't care what they are, Alexander cut in. This is my decision. Emily's face burned with embarrassment. To be discussed this way, as if she weren't standing right there, made her want to sink through the floor. She didn't belong in this conversation. She didn't belong at a high society wedding. And she certainly didn't belong on the arm of Alexander Reed. Eleanor tried one more time, her voice softening to the tone she used when trying to coax her son into more diplomatic behavior. Alexander, you cannot be serious. Your date must reflect your position. You are the head of this family, and this is my choice. Alexander's voice left no room for argument. His mother stared at him for a long moment, then at Emily, then back at him. With a small, disapproving shake of her head, she turned and left the office, her posture rigid with displeasure. The silence that followed felt suffocating. Emily twisted the cleaning cloth in her hands, her mind racing with all the reasons this was a terrible idea. Mr. Reed, she began, her voice barely steady. I really don't think you're going, he said, lowering his voice to ensure only she could hear him. Unless you're refusing me. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Refusing Alexander Reed was not something people did, not if they valued their position or their future. She had heard stories about what happened to people who crossed him, who failed him, who disappointed him. They weren't stories she wanted to test the truth of. I'm not refusing, she said quickly. I'm not sure why you want me there. Alexander took one more step toward her, close enough now that she could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the slight shadow of stubble along his jaw despite the late hour. You make people underestimate you, he said quietly. That's an advantage I respect. And tonight. He hesitated, something unreadable flashing in his eyes. Tonight reminded me that I want someone beside me who doesn't pretend. Something warm and unfamiliar twisted in Emily's chest. No one had ever valued her honesty before. No one had ever valued her at all, really, not in the way his words suggested. Feeling suddenly overwhelmed, she looked down at the floor, her mind searching for what to say next. I've never been to an event like this, she admitted. I don't know how to act around people like that. I don't have the right clothes or... That will be handled, Alexander interrupted with a dismissive wave of his hand. You won't go in your uniform. She nodded slowly, still trying to process everything happening. James stepped forward then, his expression concerned. Sir, are you sure about this? She'll be surrounded by business competitors, politicians, journalists. Could be complicated. Alexander turned to him with a look that would have made most men step back. My decision is final. Emily felt her stomach drop. This felt wrong, dangerous even. Being close to Alexander Reed meant being seen, and being seen was the last thing she wanted. For 5 years, she had survived by blending into the background, by being forgettable. One night at his side would undo all of that careful invisibility. And what if someone recognized her? What if word got back to Seattle, to the people she'd been running from? She rubbed her fingers together nervously, a habit from childhood that surfaced when she was anxious. Why me, Alexander? The question came out softer than she intended, and she realized too late that she had used his first name. His eyes flickered at the sound of it on her lips. He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a near whisper that only she could hear. Because every other woman sees the empire. You're the only one who sees the emperor himself. The words struck something deep inside her. She felt them in her bones, in the places where her own secrets lived. He was right. She had always seen him differently than the others did. Not as the ruthless CEO, not as the billionaire, but as the man who worked until 3 a.m., who kept a worn copy of Marcus Aurelius in his desk drawer, who always straightened the family photo on his credenza last thing before leaving. She had noticed these things not because she was watching him, but because she noticed everything. Survival had taught her to be observant, to read rooms, to sense danger before it arrived. James cleared his throat, breaking the moment between them. Emily, you should probably get some rest. Tomorrow will be intense. Tomorrow, preparations for the wedding. Walking beside the most intimidating man in New York. Emily wasn't sure if she wanted to cry or run or hide. Alexander turned away from her, the moment of vulnerability gone as quickly as it had appeared. Be ready at noon tomorrow. A car will pick you up. He paused at the door, his back to her. And Emily? She looked up quickly. Yes. He turned just enough that she could see his profile. When you walk into that wedding on my arm, you're under my protection all night. Everyone will know that. Her breath trembled. Okay. He nodded once and left the office, James following close behind. The moment the door closed, Emily's legs gave out. She sank into one of the visitor chairs, pressing a hand to her chest where her heart was racing too fast. Protection. His world. His arm. She didn't fully understand what that meant, but she understood enough to be afraid. After several minutes of sitting there, trying to process what had just happened, she forced herself to stand. Her shift was nearly over. She needed to sleep, though she doubted sleep would come easily tonight. Walking unsteadily, she made her way to the employee locker room. Each staff member had a small metal compartment for personal belongings. Emily's contained very little. A change of clothes, her phone, her wallet, and one other thing. She glanced around to ensure she was alone, then opened her locker and reached behind her spare shirt. Her fingers found the small USB drive she kept hidden there, protected in a waterproof case. Evidence from a different life, a different city. Evidence that could destroy one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in America and the executives who had covered up deadly side effects for profit. Evidence that had forced her to leave her career, her friends, her name behind when Richard Westfield, Nexus Pharmaceuticals' ruthless CFO, had discovered she was the whistleblower. Emily stared at the drive, her chest tight with familiar fear. If someone at that wedding recognized her, if someone connected her to the corporate scandal that had been buried 3 years ago, everything would collapse. With trembling fingers, she tucked the drive back into its hiding place and closed the locker. Tomorrow she would step into a world where she absolutely did not belong. Tomorrow every eye in that room would be on her. And she had no idea what Alexander Reed had just dragged her into. As she walked toward the subway, one question echoed in her mind. What exactly did being under his protection mean? And what price would she have to pay? If you're enjoying this story of unexpected choices and hidden dangers, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more compelling stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Emily barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Alexander standing in his office, his voice echoing in her head. When you walk into that wedding on my arm, you're under my protection. The words followed her through fitful dreams where she walked through crowded ballrooms while everyone stared, whispered, pointed. She didn't understand his world. She didn't understand his reasons. But she understood one thing with perfect clarity. There was no way back. Alexander Reed had made his decision, and now she would have to live with the consequences. By 7 in the morning, she gave up on sleep entirely. She showered in her tiny bathroom, letting the hot water ease some of the tension from her shoulders. Standing in front of the steamy mirror afterward, Emily stared at her reflection. Dark eyes, slightly almond-shaped from her Chinese-American heritage. Black hair usually pulled back in a practical ponytail. Skin pale from too many hours spent indoors. There was nothing special about her. Nothing that explained why the most powerful man in New York would choose her over the beautiful, sophisticated women who constantly sought his attention. This is insane, she whispered to her reflection. What does he really want from you? Her reflection offered no answers. She dressed in simple jeans and a sweater, though she knew she wouldn't be wearing them long. At 11:45, she paced her small apartment, checking the window every few minutes. Her building in Queens was a far cry from Alexander's Manhattan penthouse. What would his driver think when he pulled up to this neighborhood? At exactly noon, a sleek black SUV with tinted windows pulled to the curb outside. Emily grabbed her phone and keys, hesitating before deciding to bring nothing else. Whatever she needed, Alexander would probably provide. The driver stepped out, a woman with short dark hair and an earpiece, dressed in a suit that suggested security more than chauffeur. She nodded politely as Emily approached. "Ms. Chan? I'm Diana. Mr. Reed sent me to escort you." Emily hesitated, suddenly overwhelmed again by the strangeness of it all. Yesterday, she had been invisible. Today, she was being ushered into a vehicle that probably cost more than her entire apartment building. She slid into the back seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The interior smelled of leather and something expensive she couldn't name. "Where are we going?" she finally asked when the silence became too heavy. "To prepare you," Diana replied, meeting her eyes briefly in the rearview mirror. "Mr. Reed has arranged everything." Everything. Emily wasn't sure if that was reassuring or terrifying. They drove into Manhattan, through the busy midday traffic, pulling up in front of one of the city's most exclusive hotels. Diana led her through a private entrance to an elevator that required a keycard to access. They rode in silence to the top floor. The elevator opened directly into a luxurious suite with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Morning light flooded the space, illuminating racks of clothing, a professional styling station, and several people waiting expectantly. A woman in her 50s, elegant and poised, walked toward them with a confident smile. Her silver hair was styled in a chic bob, and she wore a simple black dress that somehow looked more sophisticated than anything Emily had ever owned. "You must be Emily," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Victoria Sutton. Alexander called me personally last night. We're going to take good care of you today." Emily shook her hand, feeling increasingly out of place in her casual clothes. She wanted to hide, to make herself small, to disappear. Victoria seemed to sense her discomfort. She clapped her hands once, and her assistants sprang into action, arranging tools and preparing stations. "Let's get started," she said warmly. "We have a lot to do." Diana stepped back. "I'll wait in the lobby. Take all the time you need." Emily followed Victoria to a comfortable chair in front of a large mirror. She sat down stiffly, her discomfort obvious. "I'm just," she started to say, but couldn't even find the words to explain how wrong this all felt. Victoria stopped her with a gentle touch on her shoulder. "I know who you are and what's happening today," she said, her voice kind but professional. "Listen to me, Emily. You're not just anything. Not today." Emily swallowed hard. "But I don't belong in places like this." Victoria stepped closer, lifting Emily's chin with gentle fingers so their eyes met in the mirror. "Every woman belongs where she is respected," she said firmly. "And Alexander Reed clearly respects you." Emily wasn't sure if respect was the right word, but she didn't argue. There was something about Victoria that inspired trust. A quiet confidence that reminded Emily of her mother, years ago, before everything had fallen apart. "Now," Victoria continued, "let's see what we're working with." First came her hair. Victoria carefully removed the elastic band holding Emily's practical ponytail in place. Dark, thick hair tumbled down past her shoulders, longer than it appeared when tied back. "Beautiful," Victoria murmured, running her fingers through it. Such a shame to keep it hidden all the time. Emily watched in the mirror as Victoria and her assistants worked, applying treatments, drying, styling. Gradually, her ordinary hair was transformed into something glossy and elegant, with soft waves that framed her face. Next came makeup, not the heavy, dramatic look she had feared, but something that enhanced her natural features. Foundation that matched her skin perfectly. Subtle shadow that made her eyes look even larger. A soft rose color on her lips that made them appear fuller. Emily stared at her reflection, almost frightened by the woman looking back at her. She looked different, not like someone else entirely, but like a version of herself she had never allowed to exist. "Wonderful," Victoria said, stepping back to admire her work. "Now for the final touch." She gestured to one of her assistants, who wheeled over a covered rack. With a flourish, Victoria removed the cover, revealing a stunning emerald green dress. The design was elegant but not ostentatious. A floor-length gown with a modest neckline and cap sleeves, made from a material that caught the light with every slight movement. Emily's breath caught. "I can't wear that." Victoria smiled knowingly. "Oh yes, you can." Alexander chose the color himself. Emily's stomach twisted with nervousness. "He chose it. He said green would bring out your eyes." Emily blinked, confused by this information. Why would he care about that? Victoria didn't answer. Instead, she helped Emily stand and guided her behind a privacy screen. With the help of an assistant, they helped her into the dress. The fabric was cool against her skin, the weight of it unfamiliar but not uncomfortable. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made specifically for her body. When she stepped out from behind the screen, Victoria's smile widened. "Perfect," she said softly. "Absolutely perfect." Emily turned to face the full-length mirror, and her breath stopped. The woman staring back at her was a stranger, a beautiful stranger with her face, her eyes, but none of her fear or hesitation. The green of the dress made her skin glow and her eyes appear more intense than she'd ever seen them. It was bold. It was beautiful. It was everything Emily Chun had never dared to be. A knock sounded at the door of the suite. Victoria called out, "Come in." James entered, checking his watch. "Victoria, is she REA?" He stopped mid-sentence, his eyes widening slightly as he saw Emily. For the first time since she had met him, James Crawford was speechless. Victoria smirked. "I'll take that as approval." James cleared his throat, quickly regaining his composure. "Yes, that will work perfectly." Emily felt a wave of embarrassment wash over her. "Is it too much?" James shook his head, his expression returning to its usual professionalism. "For any other woman? Maybe. For walking beside Alexander Reed? It's exactly right." They rode the elevator down in silence. Outside, another vehicle waited, larger, more imposing than the one they had arrived in. And leaning against it, arms crossed over his chest, was Alexander Reed. Emily's steps faltered when she saw him. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, white shirt crisp against his skin, his dark hair styled impeccably. He looked imposing on an ordinary day, but today he looked untouchable, powerful, commanding. Alexander straightened as they approached, his eyes fixed on Emily. For a moment, she forgot how to breathe under the intensity of his gaze. Diana moved to open the car door, but Alexander didn't approach it. Instead, he walked slowly toward Emily, his eyes never leaving hers. He stopped directly in front of her, his expression completely unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than she expected. "Turn around." Emily hesitated, heat rising to her cheeks, but she obeyed. She turned slowly, allowing him to see the full effect of the dress, the way the fabric moved with her. When she faced him again, his jaw flexed almost imperceptibly. He stepped closer, too close for comfort, and reached out to fix a strand of her hair that had fallen across her cheek. His touch was slow, deliberate, his fingers lingering near her face a moment longer than necessary. "You look—" He paused, his eyes moving from the dress to her face. Emily couldn't look away, couldn't move, could barely breathe. "Perfect." The single word made her heart race uncontrollably. Alexander held out his hand. Not a command, but an invitation. "Ready?" "No," she admitted in a whisper. To her surprise, the corner of his mouth lifted slightly. The closest thing to a smile she had ever seen from him. "Good," he said. "I don't trust people who walk into these events without fear. They're usually the most dangerous ones in the room." Her pulse jumped. "Is it really danger?" His eyes locked onto hers, serious and intense. "In my world, Emily, there's always danger. Remember that." A chill spread through her body despite the warmth of the day. Alexander guided her toward the car, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back. The simple touch made her knees weaken. Inside the car, they sat closer than she expected, their shoulders nearly touching. The tension in the air was thick enough to feel, a strange electricity that made her hyper-aware of every movement, every breath. Emily looked down at her hands to hide the way they trembled. "Why green?" she asked softly, the question that had been bothering her since she first saw the dress. Alexander turned his head toward her, his eyes burning in the dim light of the car. "Because green demands attention," he said bluntly. "And today, I want everyone to look at you." Her heart skipped a beat at the implication. He leaned slightly closer, his voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of something dangerous. "And if they look at you too long," he added, "they will look away as soon as they see me." Emily inhaled sharply, unsure how to respond. The car moved smoothly through New York's traffic, heading toward the Hamptons where Nathan Reed's wedding was being held at the family's estate. With each mile, Emily's anxiety grew. After several minutes of silence, Alexander extended his hand again, palm up. "Emily." She looked at his hand, then up at his face, questioning. "When we arrive," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument, "you stay with me. You walk in with me. You stay on my arm. You do not talk to anyone alone. You do not leave my side." His voice softened just a fraction. "I will not let anything happen to you today." Her throat tightened with emotions she couldn't name. "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. A single word carrying all her confusion, all her fear. Alexander was silent for a long moment, his jaw clenched, his eyes flickered with something unreadable. Finally, he said simply, "Because I chose you." The car slowed as they approached the Reed estate. A sprawling, elegant property with manicured grounds and a view of the Atlantic. Security personnel stood at the entrance to the driveway. Guests in expensive clothes were arriving, stepping out of equally expensive cars. Every head turned as Alexander Reed's vehicle pulled up to the entrance. Alexander offered his hand one final time. "Emily." She took it, her smaller hand disappearing in his. His skin was warm, his grip firm but not painful. He stepped out first, tall, powerful, commanding, then turned to help her. As she emerged from the car, the green dress catching the afternoon light, she felt the weight of dozens of stares. The entire entrance went silent. Whispers erupted an instant later. "Who is she? That dress. Is that the cleaning woman from Reed Tower?" Alexander Reed brought a date. Alexander placed his hand on the small of her back again, guiding her through the stunned crowd with confidence, possession, and a strange hint of pride in his posture. His chin was lifted slightly higher than usual, his eyes challenging anyone who dared to stare too long. Emily could hardly breathe. She was just a night cleaner yesterday. But today she was the woman walking on the arm of the most powerful man in New York. And as they crossed the threshold of the Reed estate, one thought echoed in her mind, louder than her fear. What will this day turn me into? The moment Alexander and Emily stepped onto the estate grounds, the entire gathering seemed to pause. A stone pathway lined with white roses led toward the ceremony space. Crystal decorations caught the light, sending prisms dancing across the manicured lawn. Security personnel in subtle black suits stood at strategic points, their earpieces betraying their purpose. Guests in designer clothes turned toward the entrance, and every single one of them stared at Emily. She felt exposed, wrapped in the emerald silk that suddenly felt too elegant, too noticeable. Her heartbeat thundered so hard she felt it in her fingertips, her throat, her temples. But Alexander's hand remained firm on the small of her back, guiding her with a confidence that cut through the silence. He didn't rush. He didn't look embarrassed. He didn't hide her. He walked proudly beside her, almost daring anyone to comment. A woman in a blue dress leaned toward her companion and whispered, not quietly enough, "Is that the cleaning girl from Reed Tower?" Emily tried to look forward, pretending she didn't hear, but Alexander slowed his pace just enough to glance at the woman. One look cold, sharp, final. The woman instantly straightened and looked away. "Don't listen to them," Alexander murmured near her ear, his breath warm against her skin. "I'm trying," she whispered, her voice cracking slightly. "You're doing fine, fine." She felt like passing out. They reached the entrance to the ceremony area, where rows of white chairs faced an elegant flower-covered arch overlooking the ocean. Ushers guided guests to their seats, but stepped aside immediately when they saw Alexander. "Mr. Reed, your family is seated in the front row," one of them said, gesturing toward where Eleanor Reed was already seated, looking regal in pale blue. Alexander nodded once and led Emily down the aisle. She felt their judgment like heat on her skin, prickling and uncomfortable. But Alexander didn't flinch. He walked slower, intentionally making everyone look. His presence filled the space like a storm. Emily could hear people whispering behind their programs. "Who is she? A date? She must be someone important. No, that's the cleaning woman." "The cleaning woman? What is he thinking?" A few phones lifted discreetly to take pictures. Emily shifted uncomfortably, wanting to disappear. Alexander's hand slid from her back to her waist, pulling her closer to his side. "Eyes up," he said softly. "Don't shrink yourself in front of them." "I'm not trying to," she whispered. "Yes, you are." He leaned slightly closer. "Stand tall." Her chest tightened with nerves, but she forced herself to raise her chin a little. Alexander noticed and nodded, approving. They reached the front row where Eleanor Reed sat with other family members. The matriarch's eyes widened slightly at the sight of Emily, but her social training prevented any obvious reaction. She simply nodded stiffly as Alexander guided Emily to sit beside him, his mother on his other side. "Alexander," Eleanor said quietly, "you're causing quite a stir." "Good," he replied simply, not bothering to lower his voice. They could use something real to talk about for once. Eleanor pressed her lips together but said nothing more. The ceremony was about to begin. Music swelled from the string quartet positioned to the side. The wedding party began to process down the aisle. Alexander's brother Nathan looked nervous but happy as he took his place under the arch. When the bride appeared, radiant in white, Emily found herself genuinely moved by the love visible on both their faces. During the ceremony, Alexander's hand found hers, resting lightly on top of it. The simple gesture felt strangely intimate, and she wondered if it was for show or something else entirely. She glanced at him once, finding his profile unusually soft as he watched his brother exchange vows. After the ceremony, guests moved to a large tent set up for the reception. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Tables were decorated with elaborate floral arrangements. A dance floor occupied the center of the space, and a live band played soft jazz as people found their seats. Alexander and Emily were seated at the head table with the immediate family. Eleanor had clearly tried to rearrange things at the last minute, but Alexander's place card was firmly beside Emily's, and he made a point of pulling out her chair himself. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly as they sat. "I think so," she replied, surprised by his concern. "It's just a lot. You're handling it better than most would." The compliment warmed her unexpectedly. As dinner began, Emily tried to remember everything she knew about formal dining, which fork to use, how to hold her champagne glass when to speak. But the conversation flowed around her, filled with references to people and events she didn't know. "So, Emily," Eleanor said during a lull, her voice carrying just enough to be heard by those nearby, "Alexander tells us you work at Reed Tower. What exactly is your position?" The question was deliberately phrased to embarrass her. Emily felt heat rise to her cheeks, but before she could answer, Alexander interjected. "Mother, you know perfectly well what Emily does, and she does it with more integrity than half the executives I employ." Eleanor's smile tightened. "I was simply making conversation." "No, you were making a point," Alexander replied coolly, "and it's not one I appreciate." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Emily wanted to sink through the floor. She didn't belong here, in this world of wealth and power games. She didn't know how to navigate these treacherous social waters. Alexander must have sensed her discomfort because his hand found hers under the table, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "Drink your champagne," he murmured. "The toast is next. Then we can escape for a bit." She nodded gratefully, taking a small sip. The speeches began, the best man, the maid of honor, the father of the bride. Each one speaking about love and commitment with varying degrees of sincerity. When Nathan stood to thank everyone, he specifically mentioned his brother. "And to Alexander," Nathan said, raising his glass, "who shocked us all by actually bringing a date." Gentle laughter rippled through the crowd. "Whoever you are," he continued, smiling at Emily, "you must be extraordinary to have captured my brother's attention. In the 20 years since our father died, I've watched him build an empire but forget to build a life. Maybe you'll remind him there's more to existence than quarterly reports." Alexander's jaw tightened, but he nodded at his brother and raised his glass. Emily felt the weight of his history pressing down, the loss of his father, the responsibility thrust upon him too young, the empire built at the cost of personal connections. After dinner, the dancing began. The newlyweds took the floor first, then were joined by other couples. Alexander stood, extending his hand to Emily. "Dance with me." Emily stared at his hand. "I don't know how. Not like this. You'll learn in 10 seconds. She hesitated, but placed her hand in his. He guided her gently to the edge of the dance floor, waiting for the current song to end. When a slower melody began, he led her onto the floor, among the other couples. His right hand settled on her waist, warm through the fabric of her dress. Their bodies drew closer than she expected, than was proper for people in their positions. Her breath hitched. He leaned in just enough for only her to hear. "Don't look around. Look at me." So she did, and suddenly the room blurred. Alexander moved with the same precision and confidence he brought to everything else, leading her with minimal effort. She followed, trusting his rhythm, letting him guide her through the crowd of spinning lights and judging eyes. "See," he said quietly, "you're fine. I'm shaking. I know." The honesty in his voice surprised her. "You're not used to people looking at you," he continued as they moved across the floor. "But they're not looking at you the way you think." "How then?" she asked. He stared at her for a long second, his gray eyes reflecting the chandelier lights above. "They're wondering how I found someone who doesn't belong to this world." Emily felt that assessment in her bones. "Is that good or bad?" "For me," Alexander said slowly, his voice dropping lower, "it's dangerous." Her lips parted, confused. Dangerous? But before he could explain, something caught Emily's attention over his shoulder. A man was standing alone near the bar, watching her. Not just glancing, staring with focused intensity. He wasn't drinking. He wasn't talking to anyone. He wasn't even pretending to be there for the wedding. He just stared, not with curiosity, but with recognition. Her chest tightened. Her breath stopped. Couldn't be. Not here. Not today. Alexander instantly felt the shift in her body, the sudden tension in her frame. His hand tightened on her waist. "What is it?" Emily swallowed hard, struggling to find her voice. I think someone is looking at me. Everyone is looking at you." "Not like this," she whispered, terror beginning to rise in her throat. Alexander turned subtly, scanning the room with trained precision until his eyes locked onto the man near the bar. Emily felt the air freeze between them. "Who is he?" Alexander asked, voice dropping dangerously low. Emily's voice trembled. "I don't know his name, but I've seen him before." "Where?" Emily looked up at him, panic rising like a tide inside her. "From the life I was trying to run from." Alexander's jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscle working beneath his skin. He didn't finish the dance. He didn't say goodbye to anyone. He didn't wait. He took her hand, grip firm but not painful, and led her off the dance floor. With a sharp look, he signaled to James, who had been standing near the tent entrance. James moved instantly, hand going to his earpiece to communicate with security. He approached them quickly, his expression grave. "Sir?" he asked quietly. "We're leaving," Alexander replied, his voice controlled but with an edge of something deadly. "Now." Emily felt her legs shaking beneath her. "Alexander, I'm scared." He didn't hide his expression now. His eyes were fire, burning with an intensity that should have frightened her but somehow made her feel safer. "You're with me," he said. "And if that man is connected to your past—" He took a breath, steady but furious. "Then we have a much bigger problem than wedding gossip." Emily's heart sank. The man was still watching them, his hand now reaching for his phone. "Who is he?" Alexander pressed again. She looked down, terrified to say the name aloud. But she had kept secrets long enough. "I think he works for Richard Westfield." Alexander stopped walking. His entire body went still. Emily had never seen him freeze like that, not even in the office when he dealt with the most challenging of business rivals. He turned his head slowly, eyes burning with something dark and lethal. "Emily," he said quietly, the softness of his voice belying the violence in his gaze. "If Westfield is watching you—" He swallowed the last part of the sentence, too controlled to let emotion slip through, but she heard the fear anyway. Then this wedding just became a trap. Emily felt her knees weaken, and Alexander whispered, "We're leaving now. If you're finding yourself drawn into this dangerous dance between Emily and Alexander, hit that like button and subscribe. The stakes are about to get much higher, and you won't want to miss what happens next." The moment Alexander decided to leave the wedding, everything changed. James moved instantly, clearing a path through the crowd while Emily followed Alexander as closely as she could. Her green dress rustled with every hurried movement, and she kept looking over her shoulder, terrified the man from the bar would appear again. Alexander reached a quieter hallway inside the main house and pulled her sharply into a corner near a side entrance. His body partially shielded her from view, creating a private space amid the chaos. "Emily," he said, voice low, jaw tight, "look at me." She forced herself to meet his eyes, though fear made it difficult to focus. "When you saw that man," he continued, "you froze. Why?" Her throat tightened. "Because I know the type of men Westfield keeps around him." "That wasn't my question," he said, his intensity burning through her panic. "I asked why you froze." Emily swallowed. "Because I've seen him before." Alexander's eyes darkened, a storm building behind them. "Where?" Her lips trembled. She didn't want to say it here. Not with people walking past them. Not with wedding music still audible in the distance. Not with Alexander staring at her like the truth could decide the rest of his life. "I can't talk here," she whispered. He nodded once, grabbed her hand even harder, and pushed open the side door. The cool evening air hit her skin immediately. Black SUVs were already moving into position at the back of the house, Alexander's security team anticipating their needs. Diana opened the rear door of the nearest vehicle without waiting. "In," Alexander ordered. Emily climbed in, her heart racing. Alexander slid in right beside her, shutting the door with a force that betrayed his controlled anger. The car pulled away from the estate immediately, tires crunching on the gravel driveway. Inside, the silence was crushing. City lights eventually appeared on the horizon as they headed back toward Manhattan. Emily stared out, trying not to cry. Alexander stared at her profile, studying every micro-expression, every reaction. After a full minute, he finally spoke. "Emily." "Yes." Her voice was barely audible. "Tell me what you're running from." Her breath stuttered. "Not yet." She wasn't ready. She had spent 5 years hiding this. 5 years surviving by silence. "Alexander, please." He leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers. "You think I'm asking out of curiosity," he said quietly. "Emily, that man at the bar wasn't drinking. He wasn't socializing. He was watching you, studying you, reporting to someone." She closed her eyes. She knew exactly who. "Is it Richard Westfield from Nexus Pharmaceuticals?" he pressed. Her hands shook in her lap. "Yes," she finally whispered. He's connected to him. Alexander's jaw clenched so hard she thought he might crack a tooth. His fists closed tightly on his knees. I knew Nexus was making moves lately, he muttered. But I didn't expect Westfield to show his face at a family wedding. He wasn't alone, Emily said, her voice shrinking. If he sent that man, Westfield knows where I am. Alexander froze for a full second. He didn't blink, didn't breathe, didn't move. Then he turned to Diana in the front seat. Take us to the penthouse. Maximum security protocols. Yes, sir. When he looked back at Emily, his face had changed. Not anger, not frustration. Something darker. Something she hadn't seen before even from him. Emily, he said quietly, I need the truth. All of it. Now. When they finally reached Manhattan, Alexander's private elevator whisked them directly to his penthouse. No staff, no assistants, no curious eyes could see them. He guided her into his home office, a room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, sleek modern furniture, and walls lined with books. He shut the door behind them. Emily stood in the center of the room, feeling small under his gaze. Alexander stayed near the door for a moment, one hand still on the handle. He took a slow breath like he was containing something violent inside. Sit, he said. She sat in one of the leather chairs facing his desk. Alexander walked around the desk slowly, deliberately, and leaned forward, placing both hands on the polished surface. His eyes didn't leave her. Start talking. Emily clasped her hands together in her lap, trying to stop them from shaking. I moved here 5 years ago, she said carefully. I changed cities, jobs, everything. I was trying to disappear. Disappear from who? He asked, though she knew he already had the answer. Westfield. Alexander's jaw tightened again. Emily continued before she lost her courage. I was a research analyst at Nexus Pharmaceuticals in Seattle, she explained. I worked in data analysis, reviewing clinical trial results for their new drugs. One day, I noticed inconsistencies in the data for Neurolex, their blockbuster migraine medication. Alexander nodded slightly. The one that went on to make them billions. Yes, but the data, it wasn't right. There were serious cardiac side effects they were hiding. 3 patients had died during extended trials, but those deaths were being attributed to unrelated causes. I found emails, internal memos showing they knew about the risks but buried them. Alexander's expression didn't change, but his hands curled into fists on the desk. I tried to follow proper channels, Emily continued, her voice growing stronger as she finally told her story. I went to my supervisor, then his boss. Each time I was told it was being handled. Then I received a promotion, a raise. They were trying to buy my silence. But you didn't stay silent, Alexander said. It wasn't a question. No, couldn't. People were dying. So I compiled everything and sent it to the FDA and several journalists. Anonymously, I thought. But Westfield figured it out. Emily nodded, the memory still vivid after all these years. Somehow, he traced it back to me. One night, I came home to find my apartment broken into, my computer missing. The next day, my bank accounts were frozen for suspicious activity. Then my car brake lines were cut. Alexander exhaled slowly, controlling his fury. That's when I ran, she said quietly. Changed my name slightly, from Chan to Chan and back to Chin later. Cut my hair, moved across the country. Took the most invisible job I could find. I've been hiding ever since. And you have proof? Alexander asked, his voice carefully neutral. Emily hesitated, then nodded. A USB drive with everything. I keep it with me always. It's the only protection I have. If anything happens to me, at least the truth might still come out. Alexander leaned back slowly, hands gripping the armrests of his chair. Emily, he said, his voice harder now. Richard Westfield doesn't forget. Men like him never do. Tears gathered at the corners of her eyes. I know. And you kept all of this from me, he continued. I was afraid, she whispered. Of me? He asked sharply. She looked down at her hands. No. I was afraid of bringing trouble to your company, to your family, to you. Alexander stared at her for several long seconds. Then, unexpectedly, he stood. He rounded the desk. Emily's breath caught when he stopped directly in front of her. Stand up, he said softly. Emily rose slowly, her legs trembling. He reached out and gently lifted her chin, forcing her to meet his eyes. You think your past makes you dangerous to me? He asked. She didn't answer. You think Richard Westfield scares me? He continued, his voice a dangerous whisper. She remained silent. His voice dropped lower, more intense. Emily, there is nothing you could tell me that would make me walk away. She blinked, tears escaping down her cheeks. And you should have told me, he said. Not because I'm angry, but because I could have protected you sooner. She sobbed quietly, covering her mouth with one hand. He lowered his hand from her chin to her waist, not pulling her close, just grounding her. No more secrets, he said. Not from me. Emily nodded helplessly. Alexander stepped even closer. His breath touched her cheek. His presence surrounded her completely. You're in my world now, he said. And in my world, we don't run from threats. Her heart raced. We eliminate them. Emily looked up at him, shocked. You mean? I mean, Alexander said, brushing a tear from her cheek with his thumb. Richard Westfield made the mistake of putting his eyes on you. He leaned in just a little, not touching her lips, but close enough to make her breath shake. And now he'll answer to me. Emily inhaled sharply. Alexander. He placed a fingertip on her lips, stopping her words. No, he said softly. You don't apologize. You don't blame yourself. You survived something terrible. You did everything alone. But you're not alone anymore. She broke into quiet tears, overwhelmed by words she had never expected to hear from anyone, least of all him. Alexander's hand slid to the back of her neck, his touch gentle but commanding. You're safe with me, he said. I'm not letting him near you ever. She believed him completely. But fear still lingered in her voice when she whispered, what if he doesn't stop? What if he tries again? Alexander's expression darkened with a promise she had never seen before. Then I'll deal with him personally. Emily's breath trembled. For the first time in years, she felt protected. Really protected. But that didn't stop the fear growing inside her as she realized something else. Richard Westfield wouldn't back down easily. And Alexander Reed wasn't a man who walked away from a fight. Their worlds were about to collide hard. And Emily wasn't sure if the explosion would destroy Westfield or destroy Alexander. The next day passed in a blur of tension and preparation. Alexander insisted Emily stay in his guest suite rather than return to her apartment. Security teams swept the building continuously. New protocols were implemented. James coordinated with legal teams and private investigators. Emily sat by the window of her temporary room, watching the city below with growing unease. She had done exactly what she feared most, brought danger to Alexander's door. In the afternoon, she ventured out, needing to escape the confines of the room. She made her way toward Alexander's office, hearing his voice inside speaking with James. She paused outside the door, not meaning to eavesdrop, but hearing her name caught her attention. Emily didn't ask for any of this, sir, James said quietly. I know, Alexander muttered, his voice tired. Then why don't you step back? Let legal handle this? It's not too late. Silence fell. Emily held her breath. I can't, Alexander finally said. Why? James pressed. This isn't just business anymore. This is becoming personal. Another pause, heavier than the first. Emily pressed her hand against her mouth to stop her breath from shaking. Because, Alexander said, low and tense, every time she looks at me, I see someone who isn't afraid of what I am. Emily's heart slammed into her ribs. And that scares you? James asked. She scares me, Alexander admitted. Because she makes me want things I've never let myself want. Emily felt her knees tremble. She needed to move before he noticed her. She turned to hurry away, but, Emily, she froze. Alexander stood in the doorway, eyes narrowing. What are you doing here? He asked. She tried to steady her voice. I was just looking for you. You look pale, he said, stepping closer. Did something happen? No, she lied, forcing a smile. Just restless. He studied her carefully but let it go. Come with me, he said. There's something I need to tell you. He led her past his office to a large living area with panoramic views of the city skyline. Minimalist furniture in shades of gray and blue. Westfield knows you're with me now, he said without preamble. Emily's eyes widened. How do you know? He called my private line, Alexander said, and he made it very clear he knows exactly who you are and why you're here. Her blood turned cold. What did he say? He wants a meeting, Alexander replied, and he specifically mentioned your stolen property. Mina felt lightheaded. The drive. I'm so sorry. Don't start, Alexander cut in. I told you, you don't apologize for exposing corruption. She bit her lip, tears stinging her eyes. Emily, Alexander said, stepping closer. You're under my protection now, not just in words, in reality. But why? She whispered. Why risk everything for me? He looked at her, something unreadable passing through his eyes. Then he reached out slowly and touched her face, his fingertips trailing along her cheek in a gesture that felt almost reverent. Because you're the first real thing I've found in years, he said quietly. Emily's breath caught. His touch lingered warm against her skin. Alexander, she whispered, I'm afraid of what he might do to you, and I'm afraid of what would happen to you if I didn't act, he replied. Before she could respond, his phone rang. Alexander checked it, his expression darkening. It's time, he said. Emily's heart dropped. The meeting? Now? He nodded. I have to go. Please, she said, grabbing his hand without thinking. Be careful. Alexander looked down at their joined hands, then back at her face. Something shifted in his eyes. A softening, a moment of vulnerability she had never seen before. I'll come back to you, he said. It wasn't a promise. It was a fact. When he left, Emily stood by the window, watching his car disappear into New York's traffic. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold the fear at bay. Hours passed. Each minute stretched longer than the last. When midnight came and went with no word, panic began to rise in her throat. Then, just as the first hint of dawn touched the sky, she heard the elevator. The doors opened, and Alexander stood there, his tie missing, a bruise darkening on his jaw, but alive, very much alive. Emily ran to him without thinking, throwing her arms around him. He stiffened for a moment, surprised, then slowly wrapped his arms around her, pulling her against his chest. You came back, she whispered against his shirt. I told you I would, he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. She pulled back to look at his face, at the bruise, at the tension still lingering in his jaw. What happened? Alexander guided her to sit beside him on one of the sofas. Westfield tried to make a trade. A trade? The drive, he said bluntly. For his silence about certain aspects of my business that could draw regulatory attention. Emily's stomach dropped. And you refused? Alexander looked at her as if she had said something absurd. Of course I refused. But your company, your reputation, mean nothing compared to exposing what he's done, he interrupted. And mean nothing compared to your safety. Emily stared at him, confused and overwhelmed. I don't understand why you'd risk so much for me. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching her face. Then, with deliberate slowness, he reached for her hand. Emily Chun, he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. From the moment you looked at me without fear or calculation, I knew you were different. She couldn't breathe. And tonight, he continued, when Westfield tried to threaten what matters to me, I realized I wasn't protecting you because it was right. He paused. I was protecting you because I couldn't imagine my world without you in it. Tears filled her eyes. Alexander, I don't know how to be gentle, he admitted. I don't know how to be the kind of man you deserve, but I know I want to try. Emily moved closer, her heart racing. I never wanted gentle, she whispered. I just wanted real. Alexander's hand slid to the back of her neck, drawing her closer. His breath mingled with hers. Then let me be real with you, he murmured. Let me be the man who stands beside you, not above you. And when his lips finally touched hers, soft at first, then with growing certainty, Emily felt the last of her fears dissolve. She had spent years running, years hiding in the shadows. But now, in the arms of the most powerful man in New York, she found what she had always been searching for. Not safety, not protection, home. Their story was just beginning. The following morning, Alexander called an emergency meeting of his executive team and legal counsel. Emily watched from the sidelines as he outlined the situation with calm, deadly precision. Nexus Pharmaceuticals has been hiding dangerous side effects for years, he told the gathered team. And we're going to expose them. The room was silent. Everyone understood the gravity of taking on a pharmaceutical giant. Sir, one of the older executives said carefully, are you sure this is worth the risk? The market implications alone. People died, Alexander interrupted, his voice sharp. And they're still dying. That's not a question of risk. It's a question of right and wrong. The man immediately fell silent. James stepped forward with a folder. We've compiled everything from Ms. Chen's evidence and our own investigation. The FDA will need to be involved, as well as the SEC. Alexander nodded. Make it happen, and prepare a press statement. For the next week, Emily watched as Alexander orchestrated a complex campaign against Nexus Pharmaceuticals. Reed Industries' considerable resources were brought to bear. Legal teams filed reports with regulatory agencies. Investigative journalists received anonymous tips. Financial analysts began questioning Nexus's stock valuation, all with Alexander's name prominently attached. It was like watching a chess master dismantle his opponent piece by piece, move by calculated move. But Westfield wasn't going down without a fight. 10 days after the wedding, as Alexander and Emily were having dinner in his penthouse, James burst in, his face grim. Sir, there's been a development. Someone's leaked information to the press claiming Reed Industries is pursuing a vendetta against Nexus because you're trying to acquire them at a discount. They're calling it market manipulation. Alexander's expression didn't change, but Emily saw his hand tighten around his glass. Westfield. Almost certainly. And sir, they've somehow obtained Miss Chen's employment records, claiming she was fired for incompetence and is seeking revenge. Emily felt sick. The narrative was being twisted, just as she had feared. Alexander stood. Release everything. All of it. The emails, the clinical data, the internal memos. We're not playing defense anymore. After James left, Emily approached Alexander, her heart pounding. What will happen now? The truth comes out, he said. All of it. But your reputation. Alexander turned to her, cupping her face in his hands. Emily, as long as people are dying from that medication, nothing else matters. Not my reputation, not the stock price, nothing. I never meant for you to fight this battle, she whispered. I know, he said. That's exactly why I'm fighting it. The next morning, the story broke across every major news outlet. Reed CEO exposes deadly pharmaceutical cover-up. The evidence was damning: internal memos, falsified clinical data, emails discussing how to hide patient deaths. Nexus Pharmaceuticals stock plummeted. The FDA announced an immediate investigation. Class action lawsuits were filed within hours. By evening, Richard Westfield had been placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. By the following day, federal agents were seen entering Nexus headquarters with search warrants. Emily watched it all unfold from the safety of Alexander's penthouse, hardly believing that her 5-year nightmare was finally ending. Not through hiding, but through standing in the light. Alexander found her on the balcony that evening, watching the sunset over the city. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on the top of her head. "It's over," he said quietly. "Westfield was arrested an hour ago. Securities fraud, obstruction of justice, criminal negligence." Emily's legs nearly gave out with relief. Alexander's arms tightened around her, supporting her weight. "You did this," she whispered. "You finished what I started." "We did this," he corrected. "Your courage started everything." She turned in his arms to face him. "Why did you really bring me to that wedding? You couldn't have known about Westfield then." Alexander smiled, a real smile that transformed his face. "I brought you because I was tired of pretending I didn't see you every night, pretending I wasn't waiting for the sound of your cart outside my office door, pretending I hadn't memorized the way you hum to yourself when you think no one is listening." Emily stared at him, stunned. "You noticed me? All this time?" "Emily Chun," he said, stroking her cheek. "I've been noticing you for 3 years. I just didn't know how to bridge the gap between us without making you feel obligated." "So you commanded me to be your date?" she asked, laughter bubbling up unexpectedly. He had the grace to look slightly chagrined. "I'm better at giving orders than invitations. I'm trying to learn." 6 months later, Nathan and his wife hosted their first dinner party as a married couple. As Alexander and Emily arrived at their home, the difference from the wedding was striking. There were no shocked whispers, no disbelieving stares. When Alexander Reed entered with Emily Chan on his arm, wearing a simple blue dress that complemented his navy suit, people smiled and greeted them warmly. Some even approached to congratulate them on their recent engagement and the success of the Emily Chin Foundation for Corporate Accountability. She was no longer the cleaning woman who had shocked everyone. She was the woman who had transformed one of the most powerful men in America. As Alexander led her through the gathering, his hand possessive yet gentle on her waist, he whispered against her ear, "Still afraid?" Emily smiled up at him, her eyes reflecting the warmth of the room. "Not anymore," she said. "Not with you." Later that night, as they stood on the balcony of what was now their shared penthouse, Alexander wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on the top of her head. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Coming with me that day?" Emily leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "No," she said. "That day changed everything." "It did," he agreed. "The moment you walked into that wedding, every eye was on you. But I was the only one who truly knew you." She turned in his arms to face him. "And I was the only one who ever truly knew you." Alexander smiled, a real smile, not the calculated one he showed the world. "The man, not just his billions," he murmured, echoing his words from months ago. "Exactly," Emily said, rising on her tiptoes to kiss him. As New York's lights twinkled below them, Emily thought about the journey that had brought them here. From night cleaner to the future wife of the most powerful man in the city. From living in fear to living in strength. She had once believed that remaining invisible was the only way to survive. Now she understood that being seen, truly seen, by the right person was the only way to truly live. And Alexander Reed had seen her from the very beginning, even when she was trying her hardest not to be seen. "Thank you," she whispered against his lips. "For what?" he asked. "For choosing me that day." Alexander's arms tightened around her. "Emily Chun, choosing you was the easiest decision I've ever made, and the best." As they turned to go inside, leaving the night behind them, Emily realized that sometimes the most unexpected choices lead to the most beautiful destinations. And sometimes, the most feared man in the city is exactly who you need to help you find your courage. If the story touched your heart, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps bring more powerful stories like Emily and Alexander's to life. Remember that sometimes the most meaningful connections happen when we least expect them, when someone truly sees us for who we are.